The 911 call that shouldn't exist. Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. There is a unique quality to fear that only truly reveals itself in isolation. It isn't the sudden, heart-stopping terror of a predator leaping from the shadows. It's a quieter, more insidious thing. It is the dread that blossoms in profound silence, the kind of silence that is so complete, so heavy, that it feels like a physical weight. It's the fear that seeps in when the reassuring noises of the world have fallen away, leaving you alone with nothing but the frantic, muffled drumbeat of your own heart in your ears. It is the fear that makes you question the very ground beneath your feet, the reality you thought you knew. Tonight's account is a journey into that specific kind of terror. It comes to us from a man whose entire profession was built on being a beacon of calm in someone else's storm. A steady, guiding voice when their world was collapsing into chaos. His job was to be the lifeline in the darkness. But one night, surrounded by the sterile, humming quiet of his own isolated workspace, he became the recipient of a call for help that should have been impossible. A call that defied logic, that twisted the laws of time and space into a horrifying knot. A call where the panicked, terrified voice crying out from the other end of the line was his own. So, I invite you now to find a quiet place. Dim the lights. What you are about to hear is a descent into the heart of an impossible, terrifying echo. This is the story of the night a man answered an emergency call from himself. My name is Alex Carter. For the past 11 years, I've been an emergency dispatcher for the sprawling, sparsely populated county of Northwood. If you were to look at a map of it, you'd see more green than anything else. It's a vast expanse of dense, old-growth forests and rolling, mist-covered hills. The kind of place where towns are just small islands of light in a great, dark ocean of wilderness. These towns are connected by miles of lonely, two-lane highways that cut through the landscape like black ribbons. It's the kind of place where everybody knows their neighbors, but where you can also drive for an hour and not see another car. My domain is the graveyard shift. Midnight to 8 a.m. It's the shift nobody else wants, the one they see as the sentence to be served. But I chose it. I prefer it. There's a strange, monastic peace that settles over the world during those hours. The frantic energy of the day is gone. The world outside is asleep, and my job is to be a silent guardian, a watchman standing on the walls of that collective slumber. My purpose is to listen to the silence, waiting for it to break. The dispatch center itself is not designed for comfort. It's designed for function. It's a small, modern bunker, a concrete box buried in the administrative complex on the edge of town. There are no windows, none. You could work a full shift and have no idea if it was day or night, raining or clear. The only light comes from the cold, blue-white glow of the monitors and the harsh fluorescent panels overhead. The air is perpetually chilled, recycled over and over, always tasting faintly of ozone from the electronics and the bitter, acrid coffee I chain drink to keep the fog of exhaustion at bay. My entire world, for 8 hours a night, is the command station, a semicircle of 6 monitors that forms a cocoon around my chair. On them, a constant, silent dance of information unfolds. A digital map of the county with the GPS icons of our patrol units moving like patient beetles. A scrolling log of incoming calls and status updates. A weather radar, its green arm sweeping in a slow, hypnotic circle. My only true connection to the human world outside these concrete walls is my headset. A thin, unassuming piece of plastic and metal that has, over the course of a decade, carried the weight of more human misery, panic, and pain than I care to calculate. You learn a skill in this job, a necessary one. You learn to compartmentalize. You have to. You become a filter. You take the raw, unfiltered terror of a person experiencing the absolute worst moment of their life, and you translate it into calm, dispassionate, actionable information. You are the bridge between their panic and our procedure. You are the voice that must remain steady, even when the world on the other end of the line is shattering into a million pieces. I was good at it. I prided myself on it. A domestic dispute turning violent, a multi-car pileup on a foggy highway, a child who can't wake their parent, I'd handled it all. And through it all, I was the rock, unflappable, the calm at the center of the storm. It was a role I inhabited so completely, I had started to believe it was who I truly was. The night it all came apart began with the same profound stillness as any other. It was a Tuesday in late October, the 28th. The air outside had that sharp, crystalline bite to it, the kind that heralds the coming of an early, hard winter. The skeletal branches of the trees outside the complex scraped against the building when the wind picked up, a sound like bony fingers tapping on the walls. Inside the center, the silence was deeper than usual. My partner for the night, Maria, was on her designated break, probably in the small, windowless break room trying to read a book under its buzzing fluorescent light. That left me alone in the main control room. The only sounds were the near-silent hum of the server racks behind a glass door and the soft click-clack of my own fingers on the keyboard as I updated a minor noise complaint log. It was 3:17 a.m. I remember the exact time because I had just glanced at the large digital clock on the main screen. I remember thinking about the long, empty canyon of hours that still stretched out before me until sunrise. It was the deepest part of the night, the hour when the world feels most asleep, most vulnerable. I was taking a sip of my coffee, which had long since gone lukewarm and bitter. That's when it happened. The line lit up. Not the non-emergency line, with its polite, unassuming chime. This was the 911 line. Its alert is a sound specifically designed to be jarring, an electronic shriek that cuts through any distraction, any level of fatigue. It's a sound that signifies emergency. Beep, beep, beep. Beep, beep, beep. I put my mug down on its coaster with a soft click. My body moved before my conscious mind had even fully registered the sound. It was 11 years of muscle memory taking over. I straightened my back, my posture shifting from relaxed to alert. My right hand was already on the mouse, the cursor hovering over the flashing red icon on the screen. I clicked to accept the call. With my left hand, I pulled the thin microphone of my headset from its resting position near my cheek and brought it closer to my lips. I took a half-second breath, cleared my throat, and spoke the words. The incantation, the opening lines of a ritual I had performed thousands upon thousands of times. 911. What is the address of your emergency? My voice was calm, clear, professional. The perfect dispatcher's voice. The response I received was the beginning of the end of my sanity. For the first few seconds, there was nothing but static. A loud, ragged, tearing sound, like the call was being made from inside a hurricane or from the bottom of a well. It wasn't the clean static of a poor cell signal. It was violent, an abrasive sound that felt wrong. And then, a voice cut through it. It was a man's voice, strangled and choked with a panic so thick it was almost liquid. Please, please, you have to help me. The words came out in frantic, desperate gasps. He's in the house. I think he's in the house. My training immediately kicked in. Home invasion. Keep him calm. Get the location. But something else was happening, something was short-circuiting the process. The voice. It was familiar, unsettlingly so. In this job, you become a connoisseur of voices. You hear every pitch, every accent, every possible permutation of human speech colored by fear, anger, or pain. You learn to read the subtle cues in a person's tone. But this was different. It wasn't just the content of the panic. It was the instrument producing it. The timbre of the voice, the specific cadence of the words, the very texture of the sound as it scraped through the static and into my ear. It struck a chord deep inside me, a dissonant, disturbing chord of recognition that I couldn't immediately place. I pushed the feeling aside. An auditory illusion, maybe. Stress. I focused on the protocol. Sir, I need your address. I can't send help if I don't know where you are. Where are you located? The voice on the other end was a frantic whisper now, as if he was afraid of being overheard. I don't know if I should say it out loud. I don't want him to hear me. He's downstairs. I heard a window break. He took a sharp, shuddering breath, a sound of someone trying not to sob. I'm hiding in the bedroom. And that's when it clicked. That shuddering breath. I knew that sound. I knew it intimately. It was the sound I make when I try to hold back tears. A wave of true, cold dread, colder than the recycled air in the room, washed over me. It started in my stomach and spread through my chest, a paralyzing chill, because I suddenly knew, with an impossible, soul-shattering certainty, I knew why the voice was so familiar. I knew every subtle inflection. I knew every slight tremor of fear. I knew the way the word house hitched in the back of the throat. I knew it as well as I knew my own name. I knew it because I heard it every single day, every time I spoke. The voice on the other end of the line, the man whispering in absolute terror from a house under siege, was me. The human mind is a remarkable thing. It has a powerful, almost desperate instinct for self-preservation, not just for the body, but for its own sanity. When confronted with something utterly impossible, it doesn't immediately shatter. It scrambles. It searches frantically for a logical foothold, a rational explanation, no matter how improbable. My mind, in that split second after recognizing my own voice on the 911 line, did exactly that. My first thought was that it was a prank. It had to be. A deeply cruel, incredibly sophisticated, and personal prank. We get them from time to time, usually from teenagers with too much time on their hands, or occasionally from someone with a grudge against a specific officer, or even one of us in dispatch. But a prank of this caliber? The technology exists, I knew that. The rise of AI voice cloning software had been a hot topic in law enforcement and emergency services circles for the past year. We'd even had a mandatory online training seminar about the potential for deepfake emergency calls, designed to sow chaos or misdirect resources. I had sat through it, clicking through the slides, thinking it was a far-fetched, futuristic problem I'd likely never encounter here in the quiet woods of Northwood. But this felt different. This wasn't the clean, slightly robotic, uncanny valley sound I'd heard in the training examples. This was raw. It was organic. It felt real because it was layered with imperfections that made it perfect. It had my slight, almost unnoticeable lisp on the S sounds, a legacy of a chipped front tooth from a childhood fall. It had the faint, underlying rasp of the head cold I was just getting over, a subtle roughness that I could feel in my own throat at that very moment. It was steeped in a panic so genuine that I could feel a sympathetic echo of it in my own chest. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through me, sharp and painful. My professional training was a thin shield, but it was all I had. I forced my eyes away from the audio waveform on the monitor and focused on the call data panel. My heart sank further. The space where the phone number should have been displayed just read. Number blocked. The location data was even worse. Normally, a call from a mobile phone will ping the nearest cell towers, and our system triangulates the signal to give us a location, usually accurate to within a few hundred feet. But this signal was a ghost. It was a scrambled, chaotic mess, bouncing off 3 different towers on opposite sides of the county simultaneously. The system couldn't get a lock. The dot on my digital map that should have represented the caller was flickering erratically over a 50-square-mile area of dense forest. It was an electronic impossibility. A call from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heart was now hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat against the sudden, oppressive silence of the control room. I gripped the edge of my console. The cool plastic felt slick beneath my sweating palm. "Sir," I said, and I was shocked at how alien and distant my own voice sounded in my ears. I was aiming for the calm, authoritative tone of a dispatcher, but it felt like a cheap imitation. "I understand that you're scared, but I cannot send help if I don't know where you are. The location data isn't coming through on my end. I need you to tell me the address." On the other end of the line, my own voice whimpered. It was a soft, pathetic sound, a sound of utter helplessness that I had never, ever made in my adult life. But I recognized the root of it. It was the sound of a cornered animal, a sound of pure, helpless terror. "My house," the voice whispered, the sound cracking under the strain. "He'll hear me, but I have to." There was a pause, filled only by that tearing static and a ragged, shuddering breath. And then he whispered the words that collapsed my world. 145 Willow Creek Lane. Please, for God's sake, hurry." The blood drained from my face. The hum of the servers seemed to fade away. The air in the room felt thin, unbreathable. It was as if I'd been plunged into ice water. 145 Willow Creek Lane. That wasn't just an address. It was my address. My small, two-bedroom house, nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, bordered by the woods. The house I had left locked up tight just a few hours ago. The house where I lived completely, utterly alone. I was here, in the dispatch center, miles away. My house was empty. It had to be. This had to be a prank. The rational part of my brain screamed it. This was no random act. This was targeted. Someone who knew me. Someone who knew where I lived. Someone who had somehow, impossibly, gotten a perfect sample of my voice and was now using it to orchestrate this psychological torture. The explanation was logical, but the fear that was coiling in my gut, cold and heavy as a snake, was anything but. My professionalism shattered. My voice lost its carefully constructed edge, and when I spoke, it came out as a tremor, a sound that was far too close to the voice on the other end of the line. "Who is this?" I demanded. It was a breach of every protocol. You don't interrogate a terrified victim. But he wasn't a victim. He was a voice, a ghost, an imposter wearing my identity. The response from the other end was not anger or confusion. It was pure, terrified bewilderment. "What?" the voice sobbed. "What do you mean, who is this?" "This is Alex Carter. My name is Alex Carter. Are you listening to me? Please, you have to listen to me. He's, oh God." The whisper dropped even lower, filled with a new, immediate spike of fear. "I think he's coming up the stairs." And then I heard it. It was faint at first, barely perceptible beneath the static. A slow, rhythmic creaking, the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls on an old wooden staircase. I knew that sound. I knew it better than my own heartbeat. It was the sound of my stairs. I heard them every single day. I knew their flaws, their personality. I knew that the third step from the top, the one with the slightly warped board, always had a distinctive weary groan under any weight. Creak. A pause. Creak. Another pause. And then groan. It was there, in the call. A perfect, high-fidelity recording of my home's unique flaw, broadcast live into my ear from a parallel nightmare. My breath hitched in my throat. This was no longer just about information. This was about experience. A prankster could look up my name and address online. But how could they know this? How could they replicate this specific, intimate sound of my home? My sanity was fraying, the threads snapping one by one. I felt a sense of profound vertigo, as if the concrete floor of the dispatch center had fallen away, leaving me suspended over a black, terrifying abyss. I was listening to an intruder walking up the stairs of my empty house, and the person hiding in terror at the top of them was me. My training, my 11 years of practiced composure, had been a sea-wall built against a tide of human chaos. But the sound of that specific, groaning stare was a tidal wave. It washed over the wall, and in its wake, all my professional detachment was swept away, leaving behind only the raw, shivering bedrock of fear. This was no longer a prank. Prank is information, a name, an address, a clever imitation. This was experience. This was the intimate, acoustic blueprint of my own home being whispered into my ear from a place of torment. My hands were shaking, not with a fine tremor, but with violent, uncontrollable jerks. I had to brace my right hand with my left just to keep the mouse cursor steady on the screen. My mind raced, desperately trying to construct a new fortress of logic. Maybe someone had bugged my house, planted microphones. Maybe they were there now, crouched silently in a closet, listening to the house's sounds and feeding them back to me in this elaborate, terrifying performance. It was a paranoid, far-fetched theory, but it was still rooted in the physical world. It was something I could grasp. It was better than the alternative, which was slipping into the chasm of the impossible. Then I remembered. My phone. The cameras. A surge of adrenaline, different this time, not just fear, but hope shot through me. I had proof. I had eyes inside the house. I could debunk this, expose the lie, and reclaim my sanity. My personal phone was on the console beside my keyboard. I snatched it up, my fingers fumbling with the passcode, my thumbs slipping twice on the cold glass screen before it unlocked. I found the security camera app, a simple, generic icon I rarely opened, and tapped it. The app opened to a loading screen, a small, white circle spinning against a black background. Felt like an eternity. Each rotation of that circle was a new cycle of my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes were darting manically between the spinning icon on my phone and the audio waveform of the 911 call on my monitor. The panicked, shallow breathing was still there, a constant, terrible whisper in my ear, a soundtrack to my own rising panic. Finally, with a soft ping, the camera feeds loaded, populating the screen in 3 small rectangles. The first was the front porch camera. It showed my empty front yard, bathed in the cold, sterile blue-white light of the single street lamp at the end of the cul-de-sac. The wind was making the branches of the oak tree dance, casting long, skeletal shadows across the lawn. But it was still empty. The second was the backyard camera. It showed my small wooden deck and the impenetrable wall of darkness that was the treeline of the Northwood forest beyond. Nothing, not a flicker of movement. The third, the one that mattered, was the living room camera. It was mounted high on a bookshelf, giving a wide-angle view of the main living space. I saw my couch, its pillows exactly as I'd left them. I saw my bookshelf, the spines of the books perfectly aligned. I saw my television, a black, reflective void. It was a perfectly still, perfectly silent diorama of my life. There was no intruder. There was no one there. And most importantly, when I zoomed in on the far corner of the feed, I could see the kitchen archway. The large window above the sink was a solid, dark rectangle. It was not broken. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed through me. It was a fake, a hoax, a very, very good one, designed with malicious precision, but a hoax nonetheless. My theory about the bugs, the elaborate performance eat, had to be that they had pre-recorded sounds, maybe, or were using sophisticated soundboards. My mind clung to that explanation like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. I took a shaky breath, trying to force my voice back into the cage of professionalism. "Sir," I said, my tone tight and strained. "I'm looking at the location. I have a visual. There's nothing there." "Are you certain you're at 145 Willow Creek Lane?" I was trying to call his bluff, to poke a hole in the facade. The voice on the other end let out a sound that was half-choked laugh, half-agonized sob. "What are you talking about? Of course I'm sure. I'm in my bedroom. I've locked the door." The voice then broke with a new kind of pain. "My dog, he hasn't barked. He was downstairs. Buster, I think he hurt my dog." My blood, which had just begun to warm with relief, turned to ice all over again. Buster, my clumsy, lovable oafish golden retriever. He was my family, the one living thing that shared my quiet life in that house. But he wasn't there. He was safe, staying at my parents' house on the other side of the county while I worked a string of double shifts. There was no dog at my house. The prank theory began to fray again. This was a level of detail that went beyond a stalker looking up public records. How could they know about Buster? I was a private person. I didn't post pictures of him online. Only my family and a few close friends even knew his name. My mind was a battlefield, logic and terror locked in a bloody struggle. I had to be sure. I had to test him. Test this imposter. "What kind of dog do you have, sir?" I asked, my voice now barely a whisper. The answer came back instantly, without a sliver of hesitation, laced with anguish. "He's a golden retriever," the voice cried. "His name is Buster. Please, stop asking me these questions. The footsteps are in the hallway now. He's outside the door." Oh God! Oh God! This was impossible. I felt my mind splitting in two, cleaved by two irreconcilable realities. On my phone screen, I saw my empty, silent house, a sanctuary of normalcy. In my ears, I heard myself, trapped and hyperventilating inside that very same house, convinced my dog was dead and a killer was standing outside my bedroom door. Both realities were happening at once, and I was the terrifying nexus point between them. "Stay on the line with me," I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I didn't know who I was trying to reassure anymore, him or me. "I am sending a unit to check it out." It was a flagrant violation of every protocol. Dispatching an active unit with lights and sirens to my own home based on a ghost call that I had visual evidence was false. A call that was, by all logical measures, a prank. I could lose my job for this. I could be suspended, investigated. But what else could I do? What if, by some twisted, incomprehensible logic, it was real? What if my cameras were being looped with old footage? What if something was happening in a dimension just slightly out of phase with my own? Something that defied technology, that defied reason. The sliver of doubt was enough. My fingers, slick with sweat, flew across the keyboard. I keyed in the command, creating a Priority 1 incident. Possible home invasion in progress. Suspect on site. I assigned the call to the closest patrol car, Unit 7, Officer Miller. His icon blinked on my map, 10 agonizing minutes away. "Help is on the way," I said into the headset. I was talking to him. I was talking to myself. "Can you tell me what's happening now? Are the footsteps still there?" For a moment, there was just the ragged, static-laced breathing. Then the voice came back, lower than before, a terrified, hushed whisper that was more frightening than any scream. "It's quiet now," he said. "Too quiet. He's right outside the door. I know he is. I can see the shadow of his feet under the door. He's just standing there." I instinctively glanced down at my phone, at the live feed of my living room. From the camera's angle on the bookshelf, I could just see the archway that led to the hall. And at the far end of that hall, the bottom of my bedroom door. The floorboards there were dark, shrouded in shadow. I saw no other shadow. It was empty, but the voice in my ear was so convinced, so terrified, so me. "He knows I'm in here," the voice whispered. "He knows I'm on the phone. He's toying with me." And then a new sound began, a sound that bypassed my ears and went straight to the primal fear center in my brain, a sound that froze the marrow in my bones. It was a slow, deliberate scraping sound, the dry, insistent sound of a fingernail being dragged slowly, sadistically, across a wooden door. "Scrapey, scrapey. He's at the door," the voice on the phone shrieked, the whisper exploding into a full-throated cry of pure terror. "He's scratching at the door. He's scratching." At that exact, heart-stopping moment, my phone buzzed in my hand. A notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It was from the security app. The white text on the black background read, "Motion detected in living room." My breath hitched. My entire body went rigid. I maximized the living room camera feed, my thumb shaking. The room was still empty. The couch, the TV, the bookshelf, nothing had moved. The notification must have been an error. A moth flying in front of the lens. A dust mote catching the infrared light. It had to be. But my eyes were no longer on the room itself. They were glued to the dark hallway at the edge of the frame. I stared, unblinking, trying to pierce the digital shadows. "The handle," the voice on the phone gasped, the words tumbling over each other. "The doorknob, he's turning the handle." And then I saw it. On my phone screen, in the live, real-time video feed of my own home. The brass doorknob to my bedroom, barely visible but unmistakable at the far end of the hallway, was slowly, silently, impossibly beginning to turn. Time didn't just slow down. It fractured. It stretched into an infinite, terrifying moment, like a frame of film melting in a projector. My entire universe, my entire consciousness, contracted to 2 points of focus. The grainy, pixelated image on my phone screen and the panicked, intimate whisper in my headset. They were two separate, impossible realities, and they were converging on me, right there in the humming silence of the control room, threatening to crush me between them. On the screen, the brass doorknob turned with an agonizing, unnatural slowness. There was no hand visible, no person attached to it. It looked as if some invisible, malevolent force were rotating it from the other side, an act of telekinesis born from sheer malice. My mind, what was left of its logical part, screamed at me that it was impossible. It had to be a trick of the light, a compression artifact in the low-light video feed, a digital ghost. But the primal, animal part of my brain, the part that believes in the dark, knew what I was seeing. It was real. In my ear, my own voice was narrating the event in real time, a terrified, blow-by-blow account of his own final moments. The two experiences were perfectly synchronized. "It's opening," he gasped, the words wet with tears that I could almost feel on my own cheeks. "The lock, it just clicked. The door is opening." "No, no, no, please don't open." A thin, vertical sliver of absolute black appeared in the video feed as the door to my bedroom began to swing silently inward. It was opening into the total darkness of my room, a darkness that felt deeper and more absolute than a simple absence of light. The motion detector on the camera, which had sent the alert to my phone, hadn't been triggered by a moth or a speck of dust. It had been triggered by the door itself, swinging open on its hinges. It wasn't a glitch. It was happening. My body was frozen solid. I was a dispatcher. My job was to act, to send help, to give instructions. Barricade the door. Find a weapon. Get out the window. The protocols were flashing in my mind like error messages on a crashing computer. But I couldn't get them to my mouth. My throat was clamped shut with a fear so absolute, so pure, that it was physically paralyzing. I could only sit there, a statue of terror, watching and listening as the surreal horror unfolded from two simultaneous, impossible perspectives. "I can't see him," the voice on the phone whispered. A strange, eerie calm was now settling over the panic. It was the terrifying resignation that comes when you know the end has arrived and there is no escape. "It's just dark. He's standing in the doorway. He's just a shape, a shadow. He's so tall he fills the whole frame." My eyes were locked on my phone, on that perfect black rectangle of the open doorway at the end of my hall. I strained, my vision blurring, trying to see what he was seeing. I saw no shadow. I saw nothing, just the yawning, empty blackness of my own bedroom. But I believed him. With every fiber of my being, I believed myself. "He's raising his hand," the voice on the line said, the tone flat now documentary. "There's something in his hand. I can't make it out. It's long and thin." I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the headset from my head, to smash my phone against the wall, to claw at my own eyes to make it all stop. But I was riveted, a helpless, mesmerized spectator at my own execution. "He's stepping into the moonlight from the window," the voice whispered, and the change in his tone was the most horrific thing I had heard yet. The terror was gone. The resignation was gone. They were replaced by a chilling, hollow, soul-freezing sense of recognition. "Oh," he breathed. "Oh God." A beat of utter silence, filled only by the tearing hiss of the static. And then he said the final words, a whisper of pure, unadulterated shock. "I know you." A split second passed, and then he screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, agonizing pain and profound betrayal. It was a sound that ripped through the headset with the force of a physical blow. A sound that seemed to shred the very air in the room. It was the sound a human being makes when their soul is being torn apart. It was my own voice, twisted into an expression of ultimate agony. The scream was cut brutally short with a sickening, wet, final sound. A sound of impact and of life ceasing. And then silence. The line went dead. The hissing static vanished. The audio waveform on my monitor, which had been a jagged mountain range of terror, flatlined into a perfectly straight, perfectly green line. The call was over. For a long, long second, I just sat there, in the humming, air-conditioned silence of the dispatch center. The only sound in the entire world was the frantic, ragged gasping of my own breath. I was hyperventilating. My eyes were still glued to my phone. In the grainy feed, the door to my bedroom was wide open. The hallway was still, empty, silent. Then the spell broke. A flood of pure, undiluted adrenaline hot and sharp surged through my system, blasting away the paralysis. I wasn't a spectator anymore. I was me, Alex Carter, at my desk miles from my house. But my house had been breached. My other self, my phantom self, had just been murdered inside it. And the killer, the thing that had killed me unless it had vanished into thin air, it was still there. I glanced at my monitor, at the blinking icon for Unit 7. Officer Miller. He was still 10 minutes out, a lifetime away, racing down the highway with his sirens blaring, responding to a call that had already reached its ghastly, impossible conclusion. He was too far. I couldn't just sit here, couldn't wait. I stood up so fast that my heavy office chair screeched backward on its casters, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced them to move. Maria chose that exact moment to walk back in from the break room, holding a fresh cup of tea, a small smile on her face. The smile vanished the instant she saw my face. "Alex, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't form a sentence. My mind was a maelstrom of fear and confusion. I just pointed a shaking finger at my monitor, at the closed call log with my address listed as the location. A call I managed to choke out. My house. Her eyes widened in alarm. She rushed over to my station, her years of training instantly kicking in. What was the nature of the call? Armed intruder? Is everything okay? No, I said, the word coming out as a strangled gasp. Nothing is okay. I had to go. I had to see. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe my own dead body on the floor. Maybe the thing that had killed me. The logic didn't matter. I was being pulled toward my house by an invisible, terrifying string. I grabbed my keys from the hook and my jacket from the back of the chair. Alex, wait, Maria called out, her voice sharp with authority. You can't just leave. Miller is almost there. Let him clear the scene first. That's the protocol. You can't go in there alone. She was right. It was reckless. It was stupid. It was everything a dispatcher is trained not to be. But the man on the phone had been me, and his final, soul-shattering scream was echoing in the architecture of my skull. A ghost sound that I knew, with absolute certainty, would never leave me. I turned and looked at her, and she must have seen something in my eyes that stopped her from arguing further. A wild, unhinged, broken fear that went far beyond the normal stress of the job. Her voice softened. Alex, please, just wait for backup. I didn't answer her. I just turned and ran from the room, bursting through the doors of the control center and out into the main hallway, my footsteps echoing loudly. I ran past the front desk, ignoring the startled look from the night security guard. I slammed through the building's main doors and out into the pre-dawn chill. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but I barely felt it. My mind was a vortex, replaying the call, replaying the scream, replaying those final, impossible words. Oh God, I know you. The drive to my house was a blur of tunnel vision and speed. I pushed my car far beyond the speed limit, the quiet country road streaking past in a flurry of dark trees and reflective signs. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white and aching. As I took the final turn onto my street, my heart leaped into my throat. I saw them, the flashing, strobing pulses of red and blue light, painting the silent houses and trees in frantic, alternating colors. Officer Miller's patrol car was parked at a sharp angle in front of my house. And the front door of my house, the door I had locked just hours before, was standing wide open, revealing a rectangle of pure, silent darkness. A dark maw. I screeched to a halt behind his cruiser, my tires crying out against the asphalt. I killed the engine and stumbled out of the car. I was walking into a crime scene, my crime scene, and I had no idea what I was about to find inside. The short distance from my car to my front lawn felt like a mile-long trek across alien terrain. Each flashing pulse of light from Officer Miller's cruiser seemed to illuminate a different, skewed version of a reality I no longer recognized. One flash, my quiet suburban house. The next, a violent crime scene. My feet crunched on the damp, fallen leaves, the sound unnaturally loud in the charged silence between the chirps of Miller's radio. He met me on the front lawn, his hand held up in a gesture that was both a greeting and a command to stop. Ken Miller was a 15-year veteran of the force, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a calm, stoic expression. But tonight, in the strobing, frantic lights, his face was pale. The usual calm was replaced by a tight, profound confusion. Alex, what the hell are you doing here? He asked, his voice low and strained. I was just about to call the center to follow up. The call? I gasped, the words coming out ragged. The adrenaline from the drive had left me breathless. It was my address, the home invasion, I came as soon as it ended. Miller's expression tightened further. He took a step closer, blocking my path to the open front door. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm. "The scene isn't secure yet. That's procedure, you know that." "What did you find, Ken?" I demanded, my eyes fixated on that dark, gaping maw of my entrance hall. "Was there a break-in? Did you find anyone? Is anyone hurt?" He shook his head slowly, a deep frown creasing his brow. "That's the thing, Alex. It's the strangest damn call I've ever rolled on." He paused, glancing back at the house as if to make sure it was still there. "There's no sign of forced entry. The back door is bolted from the inside. All the windows are locked and intact. The front door, it was unlocked when I got here. Just unlocked, not forced." His words weren't computing. They were just noise, static against the scream that was still echoing in my head. "Impossible," I whispered. "I heard it. I heard him." He said a window broke. "I heard footsteps." "The kitchen window is fine," Miller said, his voice becoming gentle now, the tone a cop uses when talking to a person in shock. "Alex, I've done a full sweep of the house. Twice. Upstairs and down. Closets, under the beds, the whole 9 yards. There is nobody here. Nothing has been taken. As far as I can tell, nothing is even out of place." His calm, rational report was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It was a hammer blow to my sanity. "No," I said, shaking my head, pushing past his restraining arm. He called my name, a sharp "Alex," but I ignored him. I had to see for myself. I had to stand in the space where the horror happened. I stepped through my own front door into the familiar silence of my home. The air was still and cool. Everything was in its place. The small pile of junk mail was on the console table where I dropped it. A pair of my running shoes was by the door. It was a tableau of my quiet, ordinary life. A life that had been violated by a phantom. My feet carried me into the living room, my eyes darting everywhere, searching for a single detail that was out of place. A single piece of evidence to prove I wasn't insane. The couch cushions were plump and undisturbed. The books on the shelf stood in neat, straight rows. I walked to the kitchen archway, my heart pounding. I looked at the window above the sink. It was perfectly fine, the glass reflecting the dark yard outside. There was no shattered glass on the floor, no cold draft. It was all exactly as Miller had said. It was normal, terrifyingly, impossibly normal. My gaze was drawn to the staircase. It looked the same as it always did, a simple structure of wood and white-painted balusters. But now it seemed sinister, like a gallows waiting. My hand trembled as I placed it on the banister. The wood was cool and smooth. I took a step up, and then another, my body feeling heavy, reluctant. I was tracing the path of the intruder I had heard, the path the terrified voice on the phone had described. My own voice. I reached the third step from the top. I paused, holding my breath. I deliberately put my full weight on it. Creak groan. The sound vibrated up through the sole of my shoe. It was the exact sound. The exact one. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead and ran down my temples. It was a real detail. A real sound from a nightmare that had left no other trace. This one small, terrible echo in the room was my only proof. I reached the top of the stairs and looked down the short, dark hallway. At the very end was my bedroom door, and it was closed. My breath caught in my throat. On my phone, on the live camera feed, I had watched it open. I had watched it swing inward and stay open. It was the last thing I saw on the screen. But now it was shut tight, as if it had never been disturbed. Slowly, I walked down that hall. Each footstep felt unnaturally loud, each one a hammer blow in the profound silence. I felt like I was moving through water, an immense pressure resisting me, my own survival instinct screaming at me to turn back, to run from this house and never return. But I had to know. I had to see the place where I had died. I reached the end of the hall and stood before the door. My hand rose, trembling, and I reached for the doorknob. The same brass knob I had watched turn on my screen. It felt cold and solid beneath my clammy palm. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and I turned it. The latch clicked. I pushed the door open. My bedroom was pristine. It was perfect. The bed was made, the quilt pulled up tight. The clothes I'd laid out for my next shift were still folded neatly on the chair in the corner. The window was locked from the inside. There was no shadow in the doorway. There was no killer. There was no victim. There was no body. There was nothing. Just an empty, silent room, filled with the ghost of a scream. I stood there for a long time, frozen in the doorway, my mind completely fractured. One reality, the tangible one I was physically standing in, was telling me that nothing had happened. It was a prank, a hoax, a hallucination born of exhaustion and stress. But the other reality, the one I had heard with my own ears and seen with my own eyes, was screaming at me that a brutal murder had taken place right here, in this very spot. My murder. Miller came up the stairs behind me, his footsteps soft. "See," he said gently. "Nothing. Clean as a whistle. Alex, we get these ghost calls sometimes. Cross signals, tech glitches that'll be patched in a week. Someone was probably spoofing your number and address to mess with you. We'll file a report. But honestly, there's nothing here to investigate." I just nodded numbly. What could I possibly say? Could I tell him that I heard myself die on the phone? That I watched an invisible hand open a door that was now closed? That the unique creak of my third stair was part of the evidence? He would have put me in the back of his car and taken me for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. And maybe he should have, because in that moment, I was genuinely, profoundly questioning my own sanity. He cleared the call. We locked up the house. He put a hand on my shoulder and told me to go home. He meant my parents' house and get some sleep. The thought of sleeping, of closing my eyes and being alone in the dark with that memory, felt like a cruel joke. I didn't go back to the dispatch center. I couldn't sit in that chair and put on that headset. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner on the highway, a place of bright lights and the smell of old coffee. I sat in a red vinyl booth, staring into a cup of black coffee I never touched as the sun began to rise. I just replayed the call over and over, a perfect, terrible loop in my mind. The terror in my voice, the scratching, the scream, and those final, chilling words, whispered in a tone of shocked recognition just before the end. "Oh God, I know you." The crime had left no evidence. No body, no killer, no broken window. It was a perfect, impossible crime. The only casualty was my mind. And the only echo of the event was the one now trapped in my head, a ghost in my own memory. I took a week off from work. I called my captain and used the words stress and exhaustion. They were true, but they were also a vast and pathetic understatement for the reality. He was surprisingly understanding, telling me the graveyard shift could chew anyone up eventually and to take all the time I needed. I didn't tell him the truth. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? The story was a confession of madness. To speak it aloud would be to give it a power I couldn't bear. I spent that week in the guest room of my parents' house, the same room I'd grown up in. I thought being there, surrounded by the artifacts of my childhood, might ground me. But it didn't. The house was a different kind of quiet, but the silence still felt heavy, listening. My dog, Buster, became my shadow. He seemed to sense the fracture in me, rarely leaving my side. His warm, solid, living presence was a comforting anchor in the storm of my thoughts, a connection to a reality I desperately needed to believe was still real. But even with him there, I couldn't escape it. Sleep offered no refuge. I would jolt awake in the middle of the night, my heart racing, drenched in a cold sweat, absolutely convinced that I could hear a faint, dry, scraping sound at the bedroom door. I would lie there for hours, frozen, listening, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the blinds. I started avoiding my own reflection. A casual glance into a bathroom mirror or a dark window would send a jolt of panic through me. I was terrified of what I might see looking back. Not a monster, but something worse. The face of the man from the phone call, his eyes wide with a terror I now understood. The victim. But you can't hide forever. The world demands participation. Bills need to be paid. Life, whether you want it to or not, goes on. Eventually, I had to go back. I needed the routine. I needed the structure of the shift, the familiar weight of the headset, the hypnotic dance of the icons on the screens. I needed to pretend that my world hadn't been fundamentally and irrevocably broken. I needed to convince myself it had just been a nightmare, a singular, horrifying glitch in the matrix of my life, a psychological fissure that was now, hopefully, closed. My first night back was an exercise in controlled terror. The dispatch center, once my sterile sanctuary, now felt like a haunted house. The low hum of the servers sounded like a whisper. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper, darker. Every time the 911 line lit up with its jarring shriek, my stomach would clench into a tight, painful knot and a cold sweat would break out on my skin. My hand would hesitate for a split second before clicking to accept the call. But the calls were all blessedly, beautifully normal. A small fire in a restaurant kitchen quickly contained. A minor traffic accident on Main Street. A hiker who had taken a wrong turn on a marked trail and was talking to us while he waited for a ranger to guide him out. With each mundane, solvable problem, a tiny piece of my composure returned. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was over. I had faced the abyss, and for reasons I would never understand, it had let me go. It was a one-time event, a nightmare that was finally, mercifully over. I was wrong. It was near the end of my shift, around 7:30 in the morning. The sun was rising, casting long, weak shadows across the county. The morning crew was starting to file in, their faces fresh, smelling of coffee and toothpaste, their chatter filling the room with a welcome energy. I was taking one final, routine call before handing over the console. It was a woman calling from a payphonia rel icon, a remote stretch of the interstate heading east. Her car had broken down. It was the most simple, everyday occurrence imaginable. She gave me her location, the make and model of her car. She sounded tired and deeply annoyed, but not panicked. I was inputting the information into the system, my fingers moving with their old, familiar speed. It was the last call of my shift. I was almost safe, almost home free. "Okay, ma'am," I said, my voice sounding almost normal to my own ears. "We'll have a tow truck out to you in about 20 minutes. "Oh, thank God," she said with a sigh of relief. "It's just this spot gives me the creeps. There's not another car in sight. It's so quiet out here." "You'll be all right," I reassured her, falling back on the old script. "Just stay in your vehicle with the doors locked until the unit arrives." "I will," she said, and then she paused. "It's the reception. The reception out here is just terrible." And as she said it, I could hear it. The sound underneath her voice. A ragged, tearing static. The same abrasive, crackling sound from that call. It was a familiar monster. My fingers froze above the keyboard. "It's almost like there's someone else on the line," she said with a small, nervous laugh. You know, like a crossed signal. My blood ran cold. The warmth of the coming daylight, the chatter of my colleagues. It all faded away. I leaned closer to my console, my ear pressed tight against the headset's foam cup. With a trembling finger, I slowly turned up the gain on the audio feed, increasing the volume, straining to listen past her voice, into the noise. And that's when I heard it. Buried deep within the crackle and hiss of the static, so faint it was almost imperceptible, I could hear something else. It was a voice, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words. It was just a murmur, a ghost of a sound, an audio wraith trapped in the electronic noise. But it was there, and I knew, with a chilling certainty that defied all logic and reason, that it was my voice. The connection hadn't been a prank. The call hadn't been a hallucination. It hadn't gone away. It was still there. It was in the system. Or, a far more terrifying thought, it was attached to me. A psychic parasite clinging to the very frequencies I used to do my job. An echo of a trauma that was somehow, impossibly, still happening, forever. A ghost trapped not in a house, but in the machine. The woman on the phone, oblivious, said her thank yous and goodbyes and hung up. The line went dead, but I could still hear it. In the silence between calls, in the low hum of the servers, in the very air of the room, I can almost always hear it now. That whisper, my whisper, I don't know what it is. A glitch in the fabric of reality. A temporal loop. A premonition of a fate I have not yet met but is destined to happen. A doorway that I answered one night that can now never be fully closed. All I know for certain is that my job used to be about being the calm voice in the darkness for other people. But now, I am condemned to spend my nights constantly listening for my own voice in that same darkness. The voice of a man who is trapped somewhere, in some other time, forever hiding in a bedroom. A man who is forever about to be murdered. And I am the one who has to answer the call. Every single night, waiting for the scream that I know will eventually come. The lines we rely on for help, for connection, are built on a fragile trust. A trust in the technology we use, and a trust in the person on the other end. What happens when that trust is fundamentally broken? What happens when the voice in the static is one you can never truly escape, because it is the same one you use to speak? Alex's story is a chilling reminder that the most terrifying wilderness is not always one of trees and shadows, but the one that can open up inside our own minds, on the other end of an emergency line. Thank you for joining us at the Wilderness Protocol. If this account resonated with you, and you wish to explore more stories from the unsettling frontiers of our world, please consider subscribing and enabling notifications, so you don't miss our next expedition into the unknown. Until next time, stay safe, and be careful of the echoes you might find in the silence. They might be closer than you think.